For this aircraft, there are 6 emergency exits.
Hello, everybody. This is Rod, your captain speaking. We are currently 30,000 feet in the air, and we haven't even left the airport. We just lit the joint. Just kidding, a little pilot humor there. We like to have fun. Our destination today is Casablanca, Morocco. So everyone, sit back, fasten your seatbelts, and prepare for takeoff. We will be arriving in 6.
7-footers, welcome back to a new episode. Quarantine edition, as always, as I hope you guys are all staying safe out there in the COVID-19 streets. As always, thank you for being a loyal listener and supporter of the 7-footers basketball podcast. You know where to find us: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. We are at 7-footers pod on Twitter, at 7-footers podcast on Instagram, and you can find me at JS Hector, and you can find Jenna at Jenna Lemoncelli. I'm pleased today to be joined by the senior NBA writer for The Athletic and the author of his seminal work, maybe? The Victory Machine, the making and unmaking of the Warriors Dynasty.
The penultimate. I don't know, whatever adjective.
Ethan Sherwood Strauss. Ethan, how are you?
The genre-defining work. I am well. How are you doing, man?
Can't complain. You know, New York is, New York City is a very interesting place to be during COVID-19, as I'm sure
man.
the Bay Area is to an extent.
Yeah, but New York that's a whole other thing. I think about that every now and again of what is it like? What is the energy of that town like right now? You know, how is it different? Because it's defined by its activity in a way that other places aren't.
100%, you're right. And it's pockets, right? Like there's certain parts of the city where you feel that energy, and there are other pockets where it's like, not so much. And what I think you're seeing is the places, the whole city is densely populated, obviously. But where I am, the Upper East Side might be a little less densely populated than, say, Harlem.
Oh, I didn't know that you were on the Upper East Side. I didn't know if I should prepare some high tea.
No. We're not those kinds of Upper East Siders.
Fancy.
Oh man! But Ethan, I'm so glad that you joined us today because
I didn't know this podcast was sponsored by a trust fund.
The trust fund edition. I love it. Well, listen, if I figure out how to write a book as good as this, maybe I will have a trust fund one day.
Oh, man.
So the book's a phenomenal read, Ethan, and it touches on so many fascinating areas that we're obviously going to get into. But I want to start at the beginning. So we're both in media. We cover the NBA. We both write about it. But how is writing a book different from long-form reporting on the NBA from a logistical perspective?
Oh, yeah, the logistical perspective is the main thing, because when I write an article, it's typically going up the next day, or maybe I've been working on it for a while, but there's an obvious timeline. With a book, that thing is going to hit nearly a year after you write it. And so what you're doing needs to have that in mind. And I was worried about, what if this happens? What if that happens? I remember worrying that when D'Lo got traded, I was going, oh man, I don't know about that. My publisher just kind of settled me down and said, that's fine. That's completely fine that happened. But the delayed effect of it is a strange thing to try to manage. And then there are just aspects of it that you don't really think about. There's more of a back and forth. There's more of a back and forth and a streamlined process as far as the editing is concerned. And then the strangest aspect to me, the most novel aspect, was just doing the audiobook. That, in a weird way, is what I'm most proud of. I was a little sick when I did it. I don't know if I had the Rona or not, but I gutted it out. And so I'm proud of myself gutting it out because I have no formal experience doing that kind of thing. But that's a whole other aspect to it. So I enjoyed it just from that process of learning, of just learning how the book comes out, when it's made, how to collect, how to get people for blurbs. And it was a little bit new. It was a little bit different, even if it's just a long article in a way.
So you are saying you are not the Alfred Molina or James Earl Jones of voice acting.
Dude, you know your stuff, because I asked the guy, and I don't know what his official title is, but he was a great guy, and he was just in a studio somewhere else in the country in my headphones. When I would slur a word, I would put the wrong inflection on a French phrase, he would stop me, and I was asking him, okay, who's the best? Who's the GOAT? Who's the man when it comes to this kind of thing? And he said Molina. Molina is incredible. He's just so good, and he really earns his keep on that end. And on the other end of the spectrum, he's had writers who are really bad at it. I'm at least lucky that there is some training in talking on podcasts. So there's some experience using your voice to communicate your writing in a way. So there's that, but there are writers who come in there, there's no facility with it at all. And in some circumstances, they think they can do it, but they really can't do it. I'm not saying I'm great at it. I'm not saying that, I did a great job. I think I was listening to it and I was thinking, I should have done this or that. But there are people where it might sound like a kid doing a book report, that kind of cadence.
Yeah.
I'm Ethan. I wrote about Kevin Durant. He plays for the Warriors. He is good.
Well, as someone tangentially, well, that's not true. It's part of my whole bag is voice work, and voice work is about acting, right? The voice is important, of course, but you are acting with your voice. That's a very different thing.
Well, you sound like you got the pipes for it. You sound like you could do that kind of thing. What's your experience in it? What kind of stuff do you do?
Did some demos, commercial work, that kind of thing, and really working on building that out a bit more as part of my whole, sport and media entertainment empire, for lack of a better term.
I wonder what that is too, because there's an alchemy to a good voice. Deeper voice, baritone with men that's complimented a lot. But I remember Bill Simmons was saying that, like, you've got the pipes to Colin Cowherd, and I was thinking Colin Cowherd doesn't have a deep voice.
No, it's not
deep. So what is that? What is that?
He's got a certain resonance and a certain gravel in his voice, right? But it is distinctive, and particularly even when he goes on one of his rants, right? It emotes and it elicits something from you. That's one of the big things with the voice, right? Can you make people feel something, right? Mm-hmm. And I think Coward's one of the best.
There's such a thing as having a great voice.
Right? The minute he starts that, you're already like, what is this dude talking about? Like it
draws you in.
Your antenna's already like, what is this?
Yeah. Well, I wonder if with him it's the voice, or if he just has other tricks of rhetoric, that he's just so great at the analogies. There are all sorts of little tricks that I think about all the time. I remember.
And think about it, Ethan. He does 3 hours of radio, like, by himself, right? I mean, that's
ridiculous.
That's extremely difficult to do.
Yeah, you have to be a different kind of person to do it. But there are all sorts of little tricks of rhetoric that I sometimes think about employing. And, one of them was, this is gonna sound crazy. I hope nobody takes this the wrong way at all. But Amin and I one summer got into a weird rabbit hole of just listening to Farrakhan speeches. Just listen. And obviously not supporting what he was saying. He was ranting and raving about Jewish conspiracies, crazy shit. There was one where he's talking about LeBron James at the time going and joining the Miami Heat and leaving Cleveland, and insinuating a vast Jewish conspiracy behind it. But I was really struck at how effective his rhetorical tactics are, that at the beginning of his speech, he just yells a bunch of unanswered questions that the speech is going to theoretically answer. And I thought, God damn it, this is terrible what he's saying, but that's a great gambit. That's a great trick. You start really leaning in where he's going, why did LeBron go to Miami? Who was behind such a decision? Why would he make it at this point of his career? And you're like, well, I want to know.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me.
Yeah.
I would like to know that. And in a way, I think I started each chapter of this book by establishing kind of this guy is in this position, but what's going to happen. I was thinking about Farrakhan when I did it at the beginning of some of these chapters. So shout out Minister Farrakhan.
Aggregators get that. Ethan Sherwood Strauss identifies with that's hilarious though. But no, Ethan, the funny thing is, and of course I knew we would get down a rabbit hole with you. Is one of the reasons why I really enjoy your work just all over, is there is that call response way that preachers and religious folks have. Two of the best orators I think I've ever heard, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. And there is a way in which he delivers, and it's just the chills, right? And that comes from that preachy, preaching to the congregation, right? To the choir, that call and response that happens. And President Obama had that as well, right? There's something in that kind of
magic.
Mhm.
There's a magic to it, man.
Mhm.
And I guess, we don't think about this in the religious realm, but in a way, it is scientific. It is, you're either getting the parishioners or you're not. Either your shit's working or it isn't. Either those pews have people in them or it's depleted. And so that's got to be a great testing ground for people to get really good year after year as a community and as a culture of doing whatever that thing is that we cannot use stats or PER to really figure out why somebody has charisma. Charisma is a crazy thing.
Yes.
It's just a crazy thing to figure out.
It's
got so hard to know.
Or you don't got it.
Yeah.
I want to get behind the curtains a little bit. So one of the things I love to do is sort of let the listeners know about what it's like in the NBA in terms of behind the scenes. Of course, they all see the glossy stuff on TV, but the NBA is this tiny ecosystem, right? Full of hyper-competitive masculinity, testosterone, insecurity, nepotism, backbiting, all these different things. Like, how does that play into one's ability to write a book about one of the most popular teams in the NBA?
Well, I think it makes it all very interesting that you've got this veneer and you've got this roiling culture behind it. And it's funny because you often wonder, do people only want what they're being sold? I don't think people only want what they're being sold. I don't. I think that they do like the glossy, happy, all the teammates love each other. They're all doing it. They're all winning one for the Gipper. I mean, they like that to a certain extent, but we also do like knowing the dirt. We also do like knowing what's behind the curtain. Michael Jordan he's so in angst over this idea of people are going to think I'm not a nice guy because, I don't know, I yelled at Judd Bushler or whatever. And we don't care, Mike. We like it. We like how vicious you are. We like how mean you are. We want to see more of it. So obviously at a certain point it would be too much and it would be depressing. And maybe I veer too much into that territory. But I do think that people like the real stuff because it's really interesting. It's really interesting to see hyper-competitive people fighting over stakes that are in the billions range or the millions range, whatever it is, especially when a lot of these characters are familiar to us in a way. So I like it, and I think it is a specific culture in American life. I think that you mentioned the hyper-masculinity. I say that without judgment, by the way. It is. It doesn't. Yeah, and it has its excesses, but a certain degree of it is necessary for that particular culture, and it's just not the same as when I worked at Yelp, as far as what guys are talking about in the locker room and how they interact with one another. It's different. It's a different world, and it's not a world that you are going to see in corporate America. So. Yep. In a funny way, it's a very familiar world to people in the sense that these guys are on television making a product that they know. And in another way, it's a totally unfamiliar world because it's a workplace where people get on each other's nerves like they do in any workplace. But the setting and the expectations and the norms are dramatically different and in some ways are of a past era that just doesn't exist anywhere else.
And for so many, particularly for the players, right? It's their livelihoods at stake. You literally have people who get brought in every day to theoretically take your job. Yeah. Right? So
cruelty is just part of doing business. And I think KD might have been tweeting about that recently, about how it's somebody is in front of you and you kill them. And that's the job. That's the job. That's what it is. You kill who's in front of you. In another time, it would be literally kill. But we've invented this thing called sports that serve as an outlet where we can have war without having war. And so, but that's the mentality. And you have to be geared a certain way. And there's this great irony that a lot of these guys are some of the most resilient people on earth, that they've been able to rise in this Darwinian crucible, but yet are so angry about their Twitter mentions. But paradoxically, that's where we're at.
Now, listen, and we're going to get into KD in a minute. Don't you worry about that. But what I find interesting and stuff that you've talked about before, I've talked about before, it is, especially with The Last Dance, and, I, like you, have tried to not really talk about it so much, but it's the zeitgeist right now. It is what we are constantly talking about. There is something, I think, to everyone or the majority of people who watches this, and they see Michael Jordan, and they identify, right, with him versus his teammates. And my thing is always like, no, you're Judd Bushler, you're Steve Kerr, you are you're not him. And I remember the Bulls vividly because that '98 title,
you're
I was
like
a sophomore in college.
You're naming white guys who live in San Diego, so I'm very much nodding. Like, I am those guys. Like, I'm literally those guys. You know,
but
as a matter of census category.
I mean, I'm Randy Brown. I'm right. You're not the guy, right? Like that.
Yeah. Well, isn't that funny though? It is funny because in a way we're renting self-esteem from them. Like we are using them as this weird vessel to have a journey that we're not actually having. And I don't know what the yearning is behind that, but that's what we have. It's like I always think like in rap where, you know, Ludacris, whoever is like saying like, don't leave your girl around me. And it's okay. Is the idea of this, like, I'm not supposed to leave my girl around you and you're going to take her? Cause that's kind of, you know, it's kind of mean. Or is the idea that I'm thinking like I'm you right now and this is like what I'm doing to people? And that question is unanswered.
Yes. Yeah. I love the way you think about these things. Yes, it is this idea of renting self-esteem, and something you've said numerous times. You know, we really don't like each other ourselves, right? Which is why we ascribe all these feelings of, yeah, I'm like that guy. And it's interesting, right? Because if you look at it too from a certain perspective, when it comes to issues of labor versus management, because that's what ownership and players are about, so many fans identify with ownership, right? With management. And it's like, but you're not the boss.
Well, I think it's because in many instances they want the team to do well, and sometimes the team doing well, the incentives for that are not lined up with the player getting as much money as possible. So I think that's part of it. And I think, I think in these days it's less that they're identifying with ownership and more that they're identifying with GMs. It's the Daryl Morey, Sloan Conference. You see all of these quants, all of these aspirational, nerdy kids who want an in into sports and might not know what they're really signing on for. In many ways, I think my chapter on Bob Myers is a little bit of a warning to those kids that this thing you want, this thing isn't what you think it is. You might not actually want it. In the abstract, you think that you want it. You would be swallowed up by this. For most people, this completely immiserates highly competitive, highly successful people who know how to go into a locker room and work the room. It is not for everyone. I don't even think it's for the people that are well suited for it. Apparently, general managers are miserable, but fantasy sports, I think, has done a lot to convince people that this would just be a tremendous thing to do. And actually being the GM of a team is not like having a fantasy sports team. No,
I think that's well said. And this is a perfect transition because this idea of, okay, you wanted this thing and now you have it, right? Yeah. This dovetails obviously directly into Kevin Durant, who you have a fraught relationship with, or maybe none right now.
I just think none.
Yeah, none.
People, I've been getting this question from people of like, what's your relationship with KD? And, like somebody asks, like, is it salvageable? It's just like, I don't think about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because ultimately, right, we go into locker rooms. These guys, we would like it to be a lovely working relationship between us, but we're never going to go out and hang out together. So it's not like we're friends in that way.
Or if we do, I've tended to get along with guys better after they're gone or after they retire. I think I have a general theory that players, sorry, I'm just moving this chair here. Oh, okay. I have this general theory that players become people after they retire because they're just in it, man. And they're just going. They are on the road constantly. They're young. They're having a whole lot thrown at them, and their identity is completely wrapped into what they do for a living. It's only when the music stops that they have to sit there and grapple with who the fuck they are. And at that point, you see a lot of maturity and you see a lot of perspective, I think, from guys after it's all over, versus when they're in it and they don't have time for all those considerations.
Yeah. You described the take zone, right, as a place to live in, and you had experience with that with the piece you wrote back in January, I think last year, about KD, and then what that spiral led to going forward. what I find so interesting, and this is called the Seven Footers Basketball Podcast for a reason, right? Like one of the patron saints of this podcast in many ways is Kevin Durant, right? Because we appreciate his game and we love that about him. He, to me, is a fascinating individual, right? When I talk about, okay, be careful what you wish for because now you have it, right? In many ways, he has it. Like, you've worked your whole life to be, one of the best, 1, 2, whatever it is, in the world. Okay, it's there now. Now you're here. How do you feel about that? And I think it's like, be careful because now it's here and you're, okay, I don't like this thing. It sucks.
Yeah. Well, it seems like he almost, in a way, got what he wanted, but also he got what he wanted and didn't do the trick that he was expecting it to do. And I think for a lot of people, just getting what you want is a curse in of itself. Getting the thing you really want, finding out that it doesn't solve all your problems. We can relate to that if you've ever beaten a video game.
Yeah.
You sit around and you go, man, I kind of miss having the goal. And this didn't. Now I'm just sad. I'm just sitting here in my pajamas feeling like an idiot because I spent so much time on this thing. But I think with him, something else happened, which is he got what he wanted. He got the championships. He got the MVP, finals MVP. But it didn't lead to everybody going, you know what, you're the greatest player. Mm-hmm. You're better than LeBron. Mm-hmm. Kevin, you're the face of Nike. All of that stuff. And this gets back to what we were talking about earlier, the alchemy of charisma, where, well, why didn't he get those things? It's a little mysterious. There's no mathematical formula for it. It's, well, he joined a 73-win team. LeBron formed a super team. And he was castigated for it, but it wasn't like joining a 73-win team that people really loved. And so when he won the championship, everybody just laid down their arms and said, "You're the best. You're the greatest." 73-win team, it's a little different. But there's this other thing, which is, Kevin Durant wins the championship, gets Finals MVP, and then expects to wake up the next day, turn on the TV, and see all these sports pundits that he's been ripping and insulting and jumping in their DMs and making fun of them just say, "Oh my God, Kevin Durant's the greatest."
Right.
It doesn't totally work that way. I would argue it probably has a better chance of working that way if you kiss some ass and you shake some hands and you do some PR. Right. But Kevin's such a purist that he just thinks
the basketball speaks for itself.
The basketball speaks for itself. That's what I've been doing my whole life. Look all it's done for me, and this is what I'm going to shut everybody up. What I'm going to shut everybody up with, and it's a little more complicated than that. How we relate to legends, how we celebrate them, how we remember them. It's a little more complicated than just the basic. What did they do? What stats did they put out there?
Yeah.
So yeah.
You're dead on with that, and I think we don't have to look very further than Michael Jordan, right?
Yeah.
There was something mysterious about him and quote unquote cool that made it so easy for everyone to identify with him. Of course, but he had his missteps, which we saw. He went on a month-long media hiatus, similar to what Durant did, but it was not covered in the same way, right? Because of the various, obvious reasons why it wasn't.
Well, yeah, I think he had just had more cachet, but he was experiencing it in a similar way to what Kevin was experiencing, which is there's this paranoia of fame. And I was fascinated watching that part of the documentary because I thought, man, a lot of this must be Twitter. But I think Twitter amplifies it and makes it more widely felt. But it was always thus in a way. And with Jordan, from his perspective in the paranoia of fame, as he's in the take zone, it seems like he's thinking, these media people, they're ripping me, they're building me up, and now they're tearing me down. Ahmad Rashad is saying, watch out, you're going to drive him. Or was it Magic? I think Magic. Yeah, Magic was saying, you're going to drive him out of this game if you don't settle it. Okay, who is saying so? Okay, it's you're playing the Knicks, so the New York media wants you to lose because you're playing the local team. So Mike Francesa is talking shit, and the New York Post is talking shit. I was alive at that point. People weren't hating Michael Jordan.
No,
that wasn't the majority of coverage was media tearing down Michael Jordan.
No.
That was all in his head because what ends up happening is, and this is the thing he can't admit to himself, and a lot of these guys can't, is that they care tremendously what people think and what everybody thinks. They deeply care about it, and it's really hard to control it. And the lack of control makes people crazy.
Yes.
And so Jordan's going crazy. It's not that the media is so negative about him. It's that he's so invested in building his own legend, and he can't simply fix it when that legend starts getting nicked and bruised.
And it makes perfect sense, right? Because to get to the level where they're at, everything was up to them and their control, right? If I work this hard and I do this thing, these things happen. But now I get here and it's, well, wait a minute, what do you mean these guys get to tell my story?
Yeah.
And I think for us as media, what I find fascinating and is sort of how we interpret that and then how we push it back out for the larger audience to consume. And I think about that as it relates to KD and Steph, right? So we always talk about how as media members, we love the guy who says stuff, right? The boring quote's kind of like, ugh, this scrum is terrible. Yeah. Who wants to waste? Steph is kind of boring, right? He doesn't say anything in any scrums or anything like that.
I have this almost cumulative PTSD from just transcribing Steph from all the years of doing it when he's in a press conference and he's doing that gravelly, just vocal fry, and I'm just, oh God, it's miserable. And you can see the gears turning in his head often of how do I take this and turn it into boring? I'm taking your question. Dell has taught me well, and I am going to convert it into an origami folding of boring. And he's gotten a little more interesting in recent years, but that is the resting mode, is boring, trying to be boring. And so it's funny. We like it. We enjoy somebody who's is a great quote, but the best way to maintain a legend is just to give people broad strokes of who you are, have them know some things, but don't know too much. And I would argue that in the modern era, celebrities are almost letting us know too much, and we don't want to know that. We just want the basics. Michael Jordan, be competitive, overcome obstacles. You get cut from the varsity team, you make it the next year, win, drink Gatorade, boom. That's all we need. We don't need a whole lot else. We don't need you speaking all the time about everything that's going on in your head. We're going to know too much about you, and we're going to know more about your flaws
and not like you.
And the aura is going to be destroyed. Or even worse than not like you, we're going to think you're pathetic at some level. We're going to think you're silly at some level. You're going to misspeak on an issue. You're going to mispronounce, I don't know, the prime minister of whoever's name or something.
Right.
Like, you're going to say something, and it's going to destroy the mystique. And I think we're living in an era of celebrities in an age of instant communication to the fans, of mystique destruction.
Yeah.
So yes,
it is really fascinating, because what happens is that we get to see who they really are, and we realize they're actually really just like us. The only difference is that they are supremely talented at this thing, which pays them millions of dollars. But otherwise, they're exactly like us. And it's sort of what happens to human beings, I think, on a larger level, which is why, like, as a society generally, we abhor poor people, right? Because poor people are us. We're all one lost job away, one whatever, and it's like, oh hell. But you shun them and go the complete opposite.
We don't want to think about it. I mean, with them, we don't want to think about them. And with the athletes, I guess something is happening where we're just, they're almost like gods, because they're projected to us, and we start giving them these godlike qualities that they probably don't have. And I mean, I remember when the whole thing with the All-Star game in Charlotte and the bathroom bill, and everybody wanted to know, what does Steph think? 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 And I just remember at the time thinking, man, I'm around Steph a lot. I mean, I don't know him intensely, but I'm around him enough to know that Steph is never saying at any point, hey, I just read this in the New Yorker, this is really interesting, or man, look at the Real Clear Politics poll of polls on what's going to happen in the upcoming Senate election. Those conversations were never happening. And that's not to say he's a smart guy, but he's a smart guy in the way a lot of engineers are smart guys, where they're smart about what they're doing, about physics, about geometry, about what have you. He didn't betray any interest in that stuff. And I thought, there's something kind of weird about expecting him to lead on this issue.
Right.
There's something weird about that. I understand the arguments for it. I get the idea that if you have a platform, you can sway people into doing making a better decision. You know, that was touched on in the Jordan documentary with the Jesse Helms Gantt election. But there's also something completely absurd about having that expectation and respecting the opinion of somebody who doesn't have time to invest in this stuff and has no inherent interest in this stuff, which is what we do apparently.
Yes, well, you know, it's our feeling about celebrity and everyone who is famous and whatever. Those things mean that they are smart and educated about everything, which of course we know is not true.
Yeah.
One of the fascinating parts about the book was your delving into ownership and the ownership class, and you know, working with Henry over at True Hoop and stuff. He's you know, he loves all the billionaire stuff. How close did it come to Larry Ellison actually getting the team instead of Gruber and Lacob?
Yeah. I think that it was close, and I think Lacob had to pull off an incredible move and come to Chris Cohan and say, look, I mean, the short version of the story is that it's an auction for the team, and it came down to Goober, Lacob as a tandem versus Larry Ellison, who was the richest man in California at the time. And so Goober Lacob knew we cannot beat this guy heads up in an auction. So what happened was Lacob flew out to where Chris Cohan was and said, look, here's the price. Here's the price right here. If you agree to this price, then we're done. Boom. You know, here we go. We'll buy the team. But if you don't, then you're just going to have to deal with that, with whatever Ellison wants to pay you. And that's what it is. And you know, Cohan could have reshopped the price, but I think a factor in it was he didn't like Ellison. Ellison had been a bit of a jerk to him. His wife, from what I was told, did not like Ellison. And so those interpersonal dynamics, it's funny, those little interpersonal dynamics of how much people like each other do decide deals that are in the billions range. That stuff apparently matters, sometimes more than you think it would.
And that was before Lacob wasn't a billionaire yet. When he bought it, so that was still a gamble for him. Like he kind of went all in. Like, all right, we're gonna go see if he calls our bluff when we go out there.
Well, it's funny, you know, he had made this incredible deal, this aspirational deal, and everybody would have said, "Oh my God, he's sitting pretty forever because of this." And oh my God, he got a stadium built on the last piece of good land in San Francisco. And now you're looking at it and you're going, oh my, he might be in financial trouble, man. I mean, the whole idea of this is I pay for it on my lonesome, but we're going to have concert after concert after concert. And Ariana Grande ain't walking through that door. Bruno Mars ain't walking through that door. Celine Dion ain't walking through that door. No musical artist for God knows how long.
Oh, no, that is rough. One of the lovely sort of little anecdotes in the book that I really enjoyed was when you were talking to Lacob. I think it was in the Chase Center, and you had said something to him, and he said, "You don't understand. When you're rich, people always try to take your money." And it's like, wait, what?
yeah, and he just walked away. No, that was on the practice court.
Okay.
And I will say this: I like the lack of pretense with Joe. Can I call Joe a great person? But I like that there's not any bullshit. He's not. It was that's something that's annoyed me about a lot of people in the Bay Area, and Benioff, who sold the piece of land to Lacob and who runs Salesforce. I feel like he's always putting on a presentation of how virtuous he is, and you've got to be bloodthirsty and kind of about yourself to be in that position. So it's always struck me as inauthentic. So in a way, people just take different things away from the Lacob stuff in my book, and I have no idea how Lacob feels about it. A lot of people just say, like, oh, my God, you made him look like a just complete unredeemable jerk, and then other people are really amused by it, and I have no idea how he feels about it. I just know I like writing about him. He's just he's a character. He's like a fictional character in real life.
He's 100% a character, and it is generally my assumption that people who are billionaires and who have amassed that kind of wealth, at best, some questionable things had to happen to amass that wealth, And at worst, some horrendously immoral things had to happen, right? Because it's just too much money. That's just the nature of it. And I will say this, to your Bay Area point, I spent some time in the Bay Area. I lived out there for a couple of years in San Francisco and in the Silicon Valley in Palo Alto, working for a digital health startup. And what always annoyed me about it was what they pretended it wasn't, right? Like, oh, we're here to save the world and do all these things. I'm like, no, you just want to be rich. Just call it what it is. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to pretend that you're doing good to do well. I'm like, no, you're not. That's not what you're doing. You're really not doing that.
Yeah, and I don't know what that is, because I think in New York it's, I'm in private equity. I'm in a hedge fund.
Yes.
And I'm rich, and you've got your chest puffed out about that. And there's almost a pride in maybe being a greedy bastard. I don't know. But for whatever reason in the Bay, it needs to be dressed up as almost like you're running a charity. And I don't know what that is culturally. I don't know why it is like that, but it is something. I mean, it's something that the show Silicon Valley, I think, has done a great job making fun of. I'm trying to remember. Gavin Belson, the character who runs the fake kind of Google Hooli, has a lot of lines like that. I don't want to live in a world where somebody else makes the world a better place before we do, when he's yelling at his employees. They're really good at mocking that particular sensibility of this area.
100%. And what you do great in the book is sort of showing the Warriors as that embodiment of that, right? Like sort of that rise to the top, and then are we staying? Are we going to make it? Are we going to, is our valuation too high? Are we the next Theranos? What are we? How was it in the early days, like the rise, right? That first Warriors title team, like how bright-eyed and bushy-tailed were they, and you as and the fellow media people around?
Oh, everybody was so innocent back then. I mean, the championship celebration was just on a level that I think was just so beyond the subsequent ones. And Steve Kerr said that it's the best night of my life. And then later in interviews, I think he said, I have to. Childbirth, blah, 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 blah. But no, he meant it when he said it. He meant it. He felt like his life had been leading up to that point. And everybody on the team was so young, and the possibilities were just opening up before them. I think that's what winning does. Ron Adams told me that, the Sage assistant coach, defensive guru, that winning opens you up to possibilities. We kind of operate within the paradigm that we're presented. And if you're suddenly presented with this idea that you can do more than what you thought you could do, and you can expand, and you can be everything Draymond became in that run, that's quite a ride to be on before you eventually start hitting the limitations, as happens inevitably.
And, the big thing for the Warriors, of course, was the emergence of Steph Curry, obviously, but which Lacob doesn't love to admit. It's also the Steve Kerr hire, right? So there was always this talk about like Kerr versus Jackson, and Jackson I feel like sometimes gets a little bit like shafted in this, like because he really did set some principles and pieces in place in terms of defensively and to get that team to believe a certain thing. And obviously Steve came and offensively unlocked them, and they did a whole different thing.
Yeah, I think it's that alchemy of charisma stuff where the way he maintained a feeling of togetherness created a certain instability. And with Jackson, he really wanted to say to the players, look, I'm in your corner. Everybody else is against you, including management. Like, management's against you, but I've got your back. And that probably worked for a while in getting the players to feel a sense of a united locker room. But that is not the healthiest way to do things for multiple years. That has a shelf life. And so just from the perspective of organizing and managing, I think that had its limitations. And then, Mark reminds me a little bit of Doug Collins in the Jordan doc, where it's, Steph Curry pick and roll a million times. You see him in that game against the Spurs where he went off on the Spurs in the playoffs, and he plays the entire second half into overtime. There was a lot of, like, one of those coaches who just has their running back run it 400 times. There was a lot of that with Mark Jackson, and ultimately that's not the best way to do things. That's not the best way to sustain what you're getting from your great player. You need to share the burden. Many hands make the work light in order to get to the next level, and I think that's ultimately what happened with the coaching change.
One of the things about coaching changes, and again, in the book you outline this so well, is the power that the NBA star has. Generally speaking, a coach can't get moved without the Stars like either tacit agreement or they're not going to buck and have a problem. And it was known that at least Steph was fond of Mark Jackson. Was he? Yeah. How did that break down when he was told we're getting rid of Mark? Was he asked, "What do you think?" or was he just like, "Whatever"?
I mean, I think he didn't have control over that situation. He was still maintaining that he expected Jackson to be back when they were eliminated in the playoffs by the Clippers, and we were all looking at each other like he's not coming back. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think Steph saw an incredible rise of his career under Mark for whatever Mark's flaws, and that's all he knew really. And so he hadn't been exposed to other kinds of coaching, and so he wanted Mark there. But Steph also wasn't a superstar at that time. He was an all-star. And so the Warriors, and I think this is actually a little bit typical to how they've done things. There's always been this strange not treating Steph like the superstar that he is, not having that deference. And it extends to not, getting his brother in for a cup of coffee and then cutting Seth Curry, even though Seth apparently can play and could have had a rotation spot. So, like Steph wanted Mark back, but at that time the relationship was just way too fractured, and what happened.
Yeah. So, the Warriors win 3 titles in 5 years, and, life's pretty good, but it's going to look a lot different whenever we get basketball back, and we're going to get into that. How do Bay Area fans feel about that particular chapter of the Warriors? We know how they feel about Steph and the core. So how do they feel about that sort of particular 3-5 run, and then, KD, the kind of elephant in the room, to use Draymond's word?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a range, but if they're being completely honest about it, they would have rather won as much as they won with Steph just being the complete head of the team with no KD, and with Steph winning some NBA finals than what happened. So it's a little complicated. I think they enjoyed having the team, the dominant team, but then it all started to sour, and I don't know how they're going to look back on it. I know what they'll say. I know they'll say that this is the best way to do it, because why be negative about something that was ultimately better than what any other team was bringing to the table? But there is that sense of loss. I do believe there's that sense of loss of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, 73-win Gestalt team. And I think that there's always going to be a bit of lingering pain that season did not culminate in the championship after all that went into it.
And particularly, right, Durant sort of like giving his body up to come back and help them try to win that three-peat.
I was talking about the 73 win season, but that one too. I mean, that one I think is a little easier to take. That one was just, guys' bodies are exploding out there. Yeah. It's just a little less painful than the Game 7. This play could have gone this way. This play could have gone that way.
Whenever we do have basketball back and Durant shows up in whatever uniform he's wearing, is he cheered, booed? What do you think?
I think cheered. I think probably cheered. I mean, he did win championships here, and I don't sense, you see grousing on message boards, but I don't sense from the normie fan a reason to hate him. It's not like the lack of Durant last season had any impact on the season. He tore his Achilles, and that's the other thing. I think tearing the Achilles moderates whatever scorn might burble up. For whatever difficulties he presented, and yes, he hasn't thanked the fans or anything like that. He did suffer a grievous injury coming back too early from an injury in order to try to help the Warriors win a championship, and fans recognize that.
And it's interesting, right? Because in order for him to get that love, right, he had to literally sacrifice his body to get it, right? Literally put his body on the line.
It was a Faustian bargain that he had made that cost him his Achilles. So, momentarily, I think the Achilles is back.
Yeah. So looking forward to whenever, again, basketball's back, how do you see this Warriors team looking going forward? I mean, Steph's going to be, 31, 32. Clay is going to be 29, 30. Draymond, everybody's aging.
Yeah, I think with Draymond, that drop-off has been more precipitous recently. I kind of wonder if Steph's age is maybe a little bit overstated as a concern if I'm just going by the track record of when players like that have been able to be productive. And you look at how long was Reggie Miller good? A long goddamn time. How
Ray
long
Allen.
was Steve Nash? Ray Allen, Steve Nash. A role player like J.J. Redick just had a great season at age 35. I feel as though it's funny. The age concerns are real for the Warriors. The Draymond situation, that's a real point of concern. But there might be almost an underrating of what Steph can do going forward because we just forget at how much shooting can lengthen the career because you're always having an impact. Even when you're not having an impact, you're having an impact as a shooter just by running around off the ball.
Yeah, makes sense. So we haven't had basketball since March 11th, but there's rumblings going on that there's going to be this bubble in Orlando and Vegas, which of course I think is a disaster. And we understand why they're coming back, right? Because the CBA and the cap's going to be a disaster if they don't. Like it's already looking like 115 million was the cap this year, somewhere around there. They're projecting 85 million for next year, which means everyone's getting short money. But what are the potential landmines though of doing this in Vegas, in Orlando, bubble, whatever?
I almost wonder if we're asking the wrong question because, okay, that's a tricky situation to pull off, but it's feasible. I can see them doing it. I can see them having enough testing in order to create that little bubble in Walt Disney World or whatever. I don't know what the quality of play is going to be. The bigger question to me is what's going to happen next season. I mean, that seems like a much harder project than this quick playoffs, little goofy, funny tournament. I don't know how the hell you get an NBA arena up to the level and standard of safety. And yeah, they're going to have to start with no fans, but even just the stuff, even just the other stuff, even just getting all the players what they need and getting it's a just carnival of activity when you're on the event level of an NBA arena. And a traveling circus, but not a cocaine circus. And they jam the assistant coaches in these tiny rooms because these facilities were built back when they had fewer assistant coaches. So you see these poor middle-aged men all the time for the road coach locker room, just all jamming up against each other, trying to figure out where to go. I don't know how they get all of that in order. I think baseball's in a way better position because baseball, you're out. That's what we're learning about this virus. I'm not a scientist, I'm not an epidemiologist, but we're learning that ventilation, outdoors, this is a huge factor. And so baseball is kind of in a decent position, but NBA is not. Yeah, it's a petri dish. And so I almost think that the immense amount of focus on whether they can complete this thing might be overrated. And how the hell are they going to get next season to happen is underrated as a consideration.
Yeah, I mean, and I've talked to people inside the Players Association and in the NBA, and I know why they want to do it, but I'd gone on record a bunch of times saying having basketball again this calendar year is maddening to me. Like, I just don't, because again, to your point, forget about fans, and we see it all the time. The amount of people that shuttle in and out of a locker room, right? That you're like, who is this guy? Who's that guy?
Yeah.
Just the shoe guy, the person who brings the food from this place.
This is the thing people don't know. This is the thing fans don't know from not being there. And it's apparently in The Last Dance, it's Jerry Seinfeld. It's everybody coming in and out. That's something that is all part of the apparatus. This is not professional sports. Is not like. It's not like growing up when you played for a YMCA team or whatever, and you show up and you do the layup lines and you play. Like, it's not. There are considerations and legal liabilities, and there's just a lot going on. And maybe they can do certain measures to pare that back a bit, but I just don't. I don't know how they're going to do it in any kind of way that is going to be safe. And beyond that, you got to contend with the politicians. I don't know how many politicians, how many governors are going to want that. I don't think they owe the NBA too many favors. So, yeah, it's going to be so hard to do.
And I think Adam, look, he has to recognize, and I know that he was very sensitive about how they were viewed as being cutting the line and jumping and getting tests. So he has to be mindful of what this looks like. And also, look, the reality of it is that the NBA is the black league, right? So if anything goes wrong or bad, like the way it's going to be talked about from outside of sports and even in some circles within sports is not going to be good if it goes wrong. So he's walking a really tightrope.
Tightrope, but also sometimes you can make your own reality with some boldness. And I have to say, sometimes I think they're wrong about what they're going to get criticized about, where they were blind to the backlash they might get over China, but they're worried about jumping the line on tests. And I don't think people care. Like, I honestly don't think that I don't think Joe Sports Fan's perspective on it, if you're getting a bunch of tests, is, well, why isn't the government making more tests for people? It's not the NBA's job to determine how many tests there are. So, look, maybe he's just quite soft-hearted and it's not about PR and he worries about who has access to testing. I'm just here to say that nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Speaking of Joe Sports Fan, you're a ratings guy, and in many sort of venues and avenues, you talked about the NBA not doing enough to appeal to the casual fan. And
I'm like a weird basketball nationalist. I think the American fan.
Yeah,
like whoever the American fan. Yeah.
And by that, you generally mean the white American fan, right? So what?
Well, I never, it's funny. I never explicitly say that, but maybe, like, I don't know. Like, I don't know.
Well, what I wonder is, can a league where the power players are black and they, like LeBron, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, Steph Kerr, they can decide where they go, when they move, do whatever they want to do. Is that hard for Midwestern Joe and Tom Smith, right? To be like, yeah, I'm cool with this.
Yeah, I guess it's the question of why is this failing to connect right now? Sorry, I'm just got a phone call.
You're all good.
Not accept that phone call. Okay. So I think it's just you have to start wondering, why is this failing to connect? What's happening? Is it because Joe, Midwest, white sports fan, doesn't like all the player movement or the player empowerment, or is it something else? This is like, again, the alchemy of charisma. It's like the alchemy of a brand. What is this brand's issue? I more make the argument that there's an opportunity cost to everything, and if you have your eyes on globally expanding the league, you are going to lack a focus domestically, not just with white fans, but with every fan within your own country, which is, the base of people who drive what the NBA TV contract is. That's not based on viewership in China or wherever. That over $2 million a year is based on people in the United States. And so what do you got to do to get people involved? What do you got to do to get new fans? Does that mean barnstorming different areas of the country that you're not usually in the summer? Just moving the Drew League out into Iowa? I don't know. I don't know. But I just think that we have to acknowledge that something has happened. We have to acknowledge that there has been a drop in interest domestically. And then work backward from there. But you have to accept the premise to do that. And a lot of people keep rejecting the premise until very recently. I was like this weird Chicken Little saying the sky is falling. And until the ratings got so bad that they were impossible to ignore, this stuff was kind of shoved aside. And it was like, oh, God, we've got so much Twitter engagement. Here's what I think. If you want to just square the circle and find a way to make the players happy in a way that makes the fans happy, I do think the key is their happiness. I mean, this might sound corny, but the palpable player misery, I think, is the worst thing for the league. It's, we say it's all the player movement and the fans don't like that maybe, and okay, feeling mercenary is part of it, but it's the misery. It's we need you guys to feel like, or to seem like, you're having a great time, because this goes back to the renting self-esteem. We're looking to you to be the person that we're pretending we are, who's having this glorious experience. And if you seem as miserable as Kevin Durant seems, or as miserable as Kyrie Irving seems, then that's not an appealing thing to check in on anymore. We would rather do something else. And so that is the big question. How do we get the players happy? I think they would like to be happy. I think the fans would like them to be happy. How the hell to facilitate that is a whole other question.
Yeah. So you're commissioner for the day. The happiness thing is who knows. What are a couple of things you would fix? One of the things for me for sure is the season length. I think that's a part of it, but that's something we always go to. I would love the idea of going down to 60, 65 games, but spread out over the same amount of time that we are now. Yeah. So end of October to June. Well, so you play twice a week, maybe three at most.
This dovetails with the happiness. One of the reasons why they're not happy is because the season is way too long a slog. And that might have been acceptable back when there was less of a competition for eyeballs and we were less exposed to their unhappiness and what a grind it all is. Jordan was obviously pretty miserable at the end of both run just because of the exhaustion. And so, yeah, if I'm commissioner for a day, I completely rubber stamp that. Let's do it. I'm into it. Yeah.
What about the digital product? I think it can be. I mean, it's so bad.
So bad. They made this deal with Microsoft, and in theory, Microsoft's going to turn it around. But I do worry if they are focusing on get rich quick gambits versus just improving the overall health of their product, because it seems like a lot of their focus of doing the deal with Microsoft is on facilitating daily fantasy. And Adam Silver has seemed to chase this particular dragon of how do we get people gambling on the NBA, because people gamble on the NFL and we want a cut of what people gamble on. Well, people like to gamble on what they're into and what they're interested in. That's what you have to figure out first. Figure out that part, and whatever you're doing with gambling will come. I don't think that ginning up the ease of gambling is going to augment interest in the NBA.
Yeah, I think. I mean, in so many ways, the NBA constantly chases the NFL in some things, right? And scarcity is what the NFL has that the NBA just can't.
That's the one lesson, and that's the one lesson the NBA doesn't learn from them. They try to learn everything else, like, oh, why is the NFL popular? Replay review. That's what's going to make us popular. It's the replay review the NFL's using. Like, that's not what people are into when it comes to the NFL. They like the violence and the scarcity. Unless you're using that, you're not really using anything that the NFL is profiting off.
Ethan Sherwood Strauss, this has been incredible, my man. I want to thank you so much for giving us some time. Let the people know where they can find you and find your book.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I've done different conversations about the book, and you somehow managed to just ask totally new questions. We had a whole new conversations. That was pretty incredible. The book is The Victory Machine. If anybody listening to this can leave me a 5-star review on Amazon, it would be greatly appreciated. Or just read it and enjoy it. That's also good as well. So yeah, I got to get better at my pitch. The Victory Machine, folks, it's a quarantine dream. Get it today.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Ethan Sherwood Strauss, senior NBA writer at The Athletic and the host of the multi-mentioned Victory Machine, the rise and falls of the Warriors dynasty. Thanks again for tuning in for the 7 Footers podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, at 7 Footers Pod, at 7 Footers Podcast, at JS Hector, at Jenna Lemon Selly, and we will talk to you guys later. Take care.
Spent a couple years out here with these raps, trying to have a plan that we made come true. Applied to some jobs, but I ain't hit back. I don't wanna trap, what's a man gonna do? Chevy told me come